Hello, welcome to Arcadia, glad to have you around. Normally when I sit down here in this chair to talk with you guys, it's more of an impromptu video where I just talk without a script. Sometimes I have a few notes jotted down to make sure that I know what I want to say and where I want to go with it, but it's still very similar to a conversation. This time, however, I'm here to make a confession. You may have noticed that the rhythm of new videos in this channel has slowed down a little bit in the past few weeks. That is because last month was November, also known as NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. And you guessed it, I was writing a novel, specifically one based upon the events that transpired in my third D&D campaign, which was also my longest in my homebrew world of Arcadia. And let me tell you, this has been a journey. It's my first novel that I'm writing in prose. I was already writing it before NaNoWriMo started. I was at 56,000 words, but I thought this would be a good excuse for me to leverage my word count, so I did a whole 50,000 words in a month thingy. And that destroyed me. It will probably still be a while before you actually see this book, because first I have to finish it. I am currently standing at 106,000 words, but I still feel like there's another 20,000 words in the story before it comes to a close. And also I have to translate it because I'm writing the whole thing in Portuguese. However, I learned a lot from this experience, so I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to sit down here and share what I learned when writing this and how I realized some things that I learned from being a dungeon master actually helped me with my writing process. One very interesting thing that I noticed was that my ability to be open to every outcome possible, which I learned from being a dungeon master, actually helped me to unstuck myself in some situations. To give you a specific example, there's a point near the climax of the story where my three protagonists are facing a city being invaded by the enemy. And while two of the characters spot an enemy brigade fighting against the city guards and want to help, the third character, a female elf named Elarian, says that they should go instead to the city walls, because that's where she saw the enemy leader appearing in her prophetic dream. My whole point in doing this was to split up the party. I wanted the elf to be fighting the enemy leader alone, and I wanted the two other characters to face a very specific and intimate battle with one enemy lieutenant, which happens to be one of the characters' brother. My problem was that I knew the enemy leader was not at the walls where Elarian saw him in her vision. That was only my excuse to split the party. Because of this, however, when I wrote her saying that they should go to the walls because that's where she saw the enemy, I felt like I was lying to the readers because he was already at the graveyard. But if she didn't say that, they would never split up. But if she did, I'd be lying to the readers. But if she didn't, well, you get the point. Basically, I was writing towards a very specific event in the future and struggling to find a natural way to do it. In RPG terms, I was railroading. Now, railroading in RPGs and in prose are two very different things. And I could argue that all books are railroads and that's what they should be. But when it came to my writing process and the natural flow of the story, I could sense a roadblock there, something that wasn't natural, and the way I solved the situation was very RPG-like. I decided to let Elarian make that call to split the party, and then I wrote to discover what would happen. In other words, instead of writing like a railroad, I sat back and let the story unfold on its own, almost like a DM who lets the players take the wheel, and instead of forcing them down a very specific path, instead sits back and just enjoys the ride, eager to see where the players take the story to. This particular philosophy also helped me decide how Elarian would follow this party splitting. Before, I desperately felt like I needed Elarian to realize that the enemy leader was not at the walls anymore before she actually got there, so I wouldn't be tricking the readers. I thought about a lot of solutions for this, from changing the prophecy that Elarian dreamt with so that the enemy would appear in the right place instead of the city walls, to make the enemy leader actually show up at the city walls, but then run away and write a whole chase sequence through the city until they both end at the graveyard. Both solutions were viable, but both also had some disadvantages, so I was really struggling here to find the right way to write this part. And that's when it hit me. Why not just let her go to the wall and see that he's not there anymore? In other words, why not let her fail? There is something that I think is very important to the whole D&D experience, and that will be a whole video by itself in the future. I will link it up there or up there if I ever come to make it. But I believe that it is very important that we give the players the opportunity to fail in Dungeons & Dragons. We cannot forget that this is a game, and people should be able to fail at it. People should be allowed to lose. Without it, victory loses its importance. So I let Elarian go to the city wall, see that the enemy was not there. She panicked. She cast a flying spell on herself to run through the whole city wall, also realizing that the enemy was not in any other section of the wall. And only then, she started thinking to herself, he may have already broken in. How can I find him? And the story moved on. I always thought that this habit of mine that I gained from my experience as a writer, namely of comic books, to be hampering my ability as a DM. This vice of always knowing what outcome I was gunning towards and trying to shape everything up to that point in order to fulfill it. Because in D&D we don't want predetermined outcomes. What I never thought that was going to happen was that this would actually feed back into my writing and actually help me become a better storyteller. I realized that my characters should have a life of their own. They should be able to make choices and possibly fail at them. And it's not extremely necessary that all their actions, successes or failures, are part of this grand plan that I devise on my head, so that everything happens for a reason. My first instinct when I was confronted with these problems was to revisit my plan and reform it into something that would accommodate to this obstacle. However, letting my character fail forced me to get into her head and think as Elarian in what was essentially the writing equivalent of a yes and technique. Okay, he's not here. How can I find him? What can I do? What should I do? And as a result, I think the story became better because I was able to make Elarian decipher the enemy's intentions and his location all by herself. These two conclusions might have come naturally to all of you Discovery writers, but that is definitely not me. In the whole gardeners versus architects things, I'm way deep on the architect side, so these realizations came up as quite a revelation. Another skill, or rather a habit, that I gained from being a dungeon master that actually helped me with my writing was actually outside of the writing room. Because normally I'm very busy, and I also tend to forget to plan my sessions ahead of time. So many times I get to the day where I'm supposed to host a D&D session just to realize I don't have anything prepared. What I do in those occasions is take advantage of the time that I spend on public transportation, like the subway or the bus, while getting to work or getting back from work, to actually think about what may happen in the session and prepare for it. There's never anything too elaborate, it's mostly bullet points or ideas, but this helps me to structure my thoughts so that when I actually get to my desk and start preparing the session, I already have everything sketched out. 1,667 words a day is very intensive, especially for someone like me who has a very mentally demanding work. I have no free time during my working hours where I can think about what I can write about next. So I had to borrow this technique. And what I ended up doing was precisely that. During my time in public transportation, I was already thinking about what I wrote in the previous day and where would that lead the story towards. That same day, when I sat at my computer to write the next batch, I already knew, even if roughly, what I wanted to tell. It was just about conveying it to words. Overall, this was a very exhausting experience, but I also learned a lot from it. And if everything turns out all right, there might be even a book in the future as a result. It's funny because writing a story based on a D&D campaign made me realize even more how much D&D is not suited to tell stories. It's certainly possible to tell stories through it, amazing stories even, but the game system itself and the way I structured my campaign made it very difficult to adapt it all to a book. There was a gargantuan amount of stuff that I had to cut out because it was not relevant and would just confuse the readers, or it was promising stuff with no payoff. There was a lot of plot threads that went nowhere. There were enemies that lost relevance too quickly. There were things that would just be a waste of time and words. But all of this felt super relevant when we were playing at the table. It felt fun, it felt necessary, it felt good. That's just to show you that while prose and RPGs are both great storytelling mediums, each has their own peculiarities, and you can't pick up the story you tell in one and transport it to the other as is. In the future, I will make a video with my full opinion on this, on how I think D&D is not the best game to tell stories. So if you want to be alerted by YouTube when that comes out, click the button down below that says subscribe and hit the bell icon near it, otherwise YouTube might not tell you. And while that video doesn't come out, you can always follow me at my social media pages where I mostly place my artwork. I apologize for skipping a few weeks on my video schedule, but I promise I will get back to work right away. I'm the first Arcadian, and I hope to see you at the next video.